You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Miss Barnes, we were on the initial visit, your initial visit to California to Neverland, and I believe you were telling us.
Your microphone's off.
We were discussing your initial visit to California and to Neverland, and I believe that you said it was when your son was about 9 years old. How much older was your daughter?
I said 10, actually. Nearly 10.
I'm sorry, 10 years old he was?
Well, he was going to be 10 in January, so it was December, so he was nearly.
Close to his 10th birthday?
Aha.
And your daughter was how old at the time?
12.
And you took trips with the defendant to a number of different locations, including Las Vegas?
That's correct.
What other cities did you go to besides Las Vegas?
Well, Los Angeles. We went to Disneyland. This is Anaheim, I believe.
Okay. Where else?
On that trip. That's about it, I think.
All right. Would it be fair to say that most of the time that you were there, you were at Neverland? Is that correct?
Not quite. Not really, no, because we spent a few days in Las Vegas. We spent a few days at Disneyland. And when we were in Disneyland, I know we went to Century City, so I wouldn't say most of the time, no.
Well, a few days in Century City?
A hotel there. There's a hotel in Century City.
Was that across the street from his condominium?
That's correct.
When you were at the hotel in Century City, was your son staying with Mr. Jackson in his condominium?
No, he stayed with us.
He stayed with you for the entire time?
I believe so.
When you were at the Las Vegas hotel, did your son stay with Mr. Jackson?
We were all together.
In Mr. Jackson's room?
Well, we shared a villa, so there were several rooms in the villa. It's like a.
And in which room did your son sleep?
With my daughter.
Your son slept with your daughter?
Yes.
So he didn't stay with Mr. Jackson at any time while you were in Las Vegas?
I don't recall. I don't remember.
He didn't stay with Mr. Jackson at any time when you were in Century City?
He may have. I'm not sure. No, I'm not. I cannot tell you, because I don't remember.
Did you stay at a hotel when you were at Disneyland?
We were at the Disneyland Hotel.
For how long? More than one night?
Yes.
2 nights?
Probably 4, 5 nights, I would say.
4 or 5 nights?
Aha.
At Disneyland Hotel?
Aha.
And did your son stay with Mr. Jackson while?
We were all, again, in the same
suite?
Yes.
Did your son stay in Mr. Jackson's room in that suite while you were at the Disneyland Hotel?
I don't remember. Possibly. I don't remember.
You're not certain?
No.
All right. Now, the first time that your son ended up staying in Mr. Jackson's room, had you had a conversation with Mr. Jackson prior to that event? Did Mr. Jackson talk with you about your son staying with him in his room?
No. It was my son's decision to stay the night.
It was your son's decision to stay?
Aha.
Well, explain how that happened.
He wanted.
Your son came to you and asked you if he could stay with Mr. Jackson?
No, we just happened to be in the room, and he said he wanted to stay. He wanted to stay there for the night, because they were having fun, and he just said he was going to stay there and.
Was this as at Neverland we're talking about?
That's correct.
It's not at one of the hotels?
No.
It's before you began your series of trips around different places, is that correct?
That's correct. Aha.
So it was in the early part of your stay in California?
Yes, I would say so.
And your son came to you. And your son came to you and said that he would like to spend the night.
He didn't come to me. Well, I was there with him.
And your daughter was there as well?
Aha.
You were all on the bed together?
Well, we were in the room together.
Which room is that? The downstairs room?
That's correct.
And there is a bed in the downstairs room?
That's correct.
And there's a bed in the upstairs room?
That's correct.
Were you watching TV?
We were at the time. I don't remember what we were doing. I'm sorry.
Was your husband there as well?
I don't remember.
Was your daughter there as well?
I presume so.
Do you know at what hour it was that your son,
No, I don't remember.
that your son expressed the desire to remain in Mr. Jackson's room?
I don't remember.
Was it late at night?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Was it potentially very early in the morning?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I just don't remember. It was just a long time ago.
Did you understand him to mean that he was going to be sleeping in Mr. Jackson's bed?
I would imagine so, because eventually he would have fallen asleep.
Is that where he was at the time that you left the room?
What do you mean?
At the time that your son said he wanted to stay there, was Mr. Jackson there?
Yes, he was.
Was Mr. Jackson on the bed?
No, he was just in the room, sitting on one of the chairs, walking around. He likes walking around.
He walks around?
Aha.
So he was walking around, and your son was on the bed?
I'm not really sure whether he was on the bed or whether he was playing with something on the floor, or.
Do you remember the conversation where he asked you, your son asked you to remain in Mr. Jackson's room? Do you remember that conversation?
No, I don't.
But you do remember that it was your son who asked if he could stay there.
It was his decision, yes.
Was Mr. Jackson party to that conversation?
No. Well, he was there. But he wasn't party to, he wasn't actually taking part in the conversation, if that's what you mean.
Did you say to your son, no, that's not appropriate. Come back to the guest cottage with your family?
No, I didn't.
You said it was all right for him to stay in that room?
Yes.
Did Mr. Jackson say to you, it's okay with me, he can stay here? Did he say that to you?
Well, I don't remember what he said at the time. I just asked him if it was okay. And.
Who asked who if it was okay?
I asked Mr. Jackson if it was okay, and he said, yes. If he wants to stay, that's fine.
So you did have a conversation with Mr. Jackson about your son remaining?
Well, I can't say that it's a conversation. If I just asked him something, it's not really a conversation as far as I'm concerned, I'm sorry.
Now, your son at the time was almost 10 years old?
That's correct.
And Mr. Jackson at the time was in his mid-30s?
Yes.
Had your son slept with any other man in his mid-30s up to that point other than a relative?
Well, he slept with my brother at my parents' place.
Do you understand your brother to be a relative?
Objection. The prosecutor is not letting her complete her answer.
The objection is overruled. You may answer the last question. Do you want it read back?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear.
I'll have the court reporter read it to you.
Do you understand your brother to be a relative?
Yes.
All right. Do you understand that the question I asked was other than relatives? Had your son, at that point in his life, slept with any other men other than relatives, adult, grown men?
No.
All right. Since that date, has he slept with any adult, grown men during the balance of his adolescence other than a relative?
Not that I know.
All right. Now, Miss Barnes, at the time that he first spent the night in Mr. Jackson's room, in Mr. Jackson's bed, you had known Mr. Jackson what, a couple days?
Well, I had met him a couple of days, but I had known him, I had been friends with him, I consider myself being friends with him, because we had communicated over the phone for several years prior to that.
You'd had telephone conversations.
Aha.
With him. The first time that you actually spent any time in his home with him was the occasion of this first visit just prior to your son's
That's correct.
10th birthday. All right. Did your son continue to sleep with him thereafter?
Not every day.
But many days?
On occasions.
And your son visited Mr. Jackson on a regular basis over the years for the balance of his adolescence, did he not?
And we did as, my daughter, myself and my son. We did.
Yes.
And my husband was present on occasions, but he had to work on other occasions.
Yes. And other occasions your son came by himself?
And other occasions, yes, he did come by himself.
Some occasions he went with you?
That's correct.
On some occasions he traveled with Mr. Jackson extensively, did he not?
I would say so.
He traveled rather extensively with Mr. Jackson throughout the United States, didn't he?
I believe so.
Do you know how many cities he traveled with your son, with your son?
I couldn't tell you how many cities, no.
Were you present when he traveled through the United States with your son?
To some places I was present, yes.
Which places were you present?
Chicago, Las Vegas. I'm not really sure. There were several occasions where I was present.
Several occasions beyond Chicago and Las Vegas?
Well, not several cities, but several occasions where.
Were you with your son on all of the occasions when he traveled with Mr. Jackson throughout the United States?
Not all. Not all the occasions, no.
Were there occasions when you stayed back in Australia?
Yes, there were occasions when I stayed back.
And your husband stayed back in Australia as well?
That's correct.
For what periods of time would your son be in California or traveling in the United States with Mr. Jackson without you being there?
I don't recall.
And you have no idea what cities they went to?
Well, I have an idea of some of the cities they went to.
Alright, you just said Las Vegas and Chicago. Do you remember any of the others?
I know that he's been to New York with Mr. Jackson.
He went to New York. Okay, where else?
Chicago.
And Chicago?
I don't really recall any other cities in the United States.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
May I see?
Same ones we did yesterday.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to show you a series of photographs, if I may, and please tell me if you recognize these photographs. Number 889 I'll begin with. 2 photographs in the front, 2 photographs in the back. Go ahead and look at the back side as well.
Aha.
Who's the subject of those photographs?
My son.
Brett?
That's correct.
And approximately how old was he when those pictures were taken?
Like I said, probably about 10, I guess. 10, 11.
Do you have a recollection of those pictures being taken?
These ones, definitely, because he was just playing games. And him and my daughter were playing games in the photo box, and they were just pulling faces.
This is a photo box at Neverland?
That's correct.
Alright, and the 2 photographs you're talking about are the 2 on the back side of 889. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How about the 2 photographs on the front side of 889? Do you recognize those?
No, I don't recognize anyone's face in those.
Do you recognize the setting?
I believe I do, yes.
And where is that?
Or do I? No, I'm not really sure actually.
That's fine. Take a look at Exhibit 890, 2 photographs in the front. Do you recognize the 2 photographs?
No, I don't.
Do you recognize the people in either of the 2 photographs?
I do.
Who are they?
The top photo is Mr. Jackson, and I believe so. And I need my glasses for that one. And the bottom one is my son.
Alright, number 891, do you recognize the subject matter of those 2 photographs?
I believe they're Mr. Jackson.
Okay, are you familiar with the setting of those photographs? Were you there when they were taken?
No.
You don't have a recollection of these photographs being taken, is that correct?
No.
The 3 photographs on the back of 891, do you recognize those?
I believe them to be Mr. Jackson.
Number 892, 2 photographs in the front.
Aha.
Who are they?
The top one of my son Brett, and the bottom one of my son with Mr. Jackson.
How old do you believe Brett is in those photographs?
About 12, I would say. Probably 12, 13. Probably 12, I'd say.
He had long hair that he wore at the time?
Aha.
Did he wear long hair for a number of years like that?
He did. And then he had a haircut in 1993, and then he grew it again.
On the back side of exhibit number 892, who is that?
Again, my son with Mr. Jackson.
Number 893?
Same.
Again, your son and Mr. Jackson, both photographs?
Aha.
And the photograph on the back, the top one.
Aha.
Is your son?
That's correct.
Okay. And the bottom one as well?
The bottom one is my son.
Number 894, 4 photographs?
Aha, Mr. Jackson.
And the 2 on the back?
Again, Mr. Jackson.
And 895, we have 2 photographs in the front and 4 on the back.
Aha, my son.
Okay. Now, 896, we have 2 photographs in the front and 2 on the back. Take a look at these and tell me if you recognize them.
No, I don't believe I know the location.
The 2 photographs on the back and the 1 photograph on the front on the bottom are of buildings and a skyline. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you don't remember that setting at all? That's not familiar to you?
No.
Okay. Did you travel to Chicago with your son and Mr. Jackson?
I did on one occasion, when he was filming the video for the song Jam with Mr. Michael Jordan in that video. Yes, that was the occasion I traveled with.
Where did your son stay in Chicago during that trip?
He stayed with me at times and
With Mr. Jackson?
with Mr. Jackson at times, yes.
Yeah. How long did that tour go on? Was he actually on a tour?
No, that was just a few days that we went to Chicago, and then we had to come back. We had to go back again.
Do you remember how old your son was at that time?
About 11.
Between the ages of 10
10.
and 13, how often did your son travel to Neverland?
Several times.
Several times, meaning what?
I don't remember.
More than once a year?
I would say probably, yes.
More than twice a year?
Probably, on average, about 2-3 times.
2 or 3 times a year. On how many of those occasions did you accompany him to Neverland between the ages of 10 and 13?
Most of the time I did.
Now, your son traveled with him extensively in South America, did he not?
No, we were present, my family. My husband, my daughter and I were present when we toured South America.
Alright, and how long of a tour was that?
I don't quite remember. Couple months maybe. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Did you travel for the entirety of that tour?
Yes, I did.
So for a couple months you traveled throughout South America?
Aha.
And your son was there as well the entire time?
That's correct. And my daughter and my husband.
Your daughter and your husband and you for the entire time?
Yes.
That was a couple months?
I would say probably, it could have been 3 months. I don't remember.
3 months?
Could have been.
Your husband was able to take 3 months off from work?
Yes, because he had long service leaves.
He had what?
Long, in Australia, after you work for, say, 10 years, you're entitled to long service leave, so you have 3 months every 10 years. And he had 2 lots of long service leave that he was able to take.
And that trip was paid for entirely by Mr. Jackson, was it not?
That's correct.
And is it true that during the entirety of that trip your son slept in Mr. Jackson's room with Mr. Jackson?
I wouldn't say during the entirety.
Most of it?
I would say at times.
At times?
Aha.
What does that mean? Once a week?
Well, I can't give you an exact number of times, because it happened quite a while.
Your son was how old at that point, the time of the South America trip?
12, I would say.
I'm sorry?
12.
12? 12 years old? Did your husband ever express any concerns to you about your son sleeping in the same bed with Mr. Jackson?
No.
Did you ever discuss it with him at all?
Yes. We talked, well, we didn't see any reason, we talked about it. It wasn't a discussion, as such, that, because I couldn't make a decision and say, well, yes, it's okay, and not consult my husband, because he's part of the family. So
at some point in time there was a discussion that you had with your husband about your son sleeping with Michael Jackson?
A conversation that we decided whether it was okay, because we didn't want to impose on Mr. Jackson.
Was this the sole issue that you were dealing with, was whether or not your son sleeping with him was an imposition for Mr. Jackson? That was the sole concern you had?
Yes.
How many conversations did you have with your husband about the question of where your son slept?
I don't remember.
More than 10?
No. I don't remember.
Do you remember at what age your child was at the time of that discussion?
No, I don't remember.
He could have been 10?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Could have been 13?
I don't remember.
Do you know if he had already been sleeping with Mr. Jackson for a period of 3 or 4 years by the time you had this conversation with your husband?
I don't think so.
Well,
I think it would have been before that.
perhaps a year?
No, it would have been at the beginning, I guess.
So your son was closer to age 10, or perhaps age 10 at the time this happened.
That's correct, yes.
Alright, and then your discussion with your husband took place where? Was it in Australia or was it in the United States?
While we were here.
So, here, being what? Neverland, California?
Yes.
So early on, then. Was it perhaps the first visit that you had taken to Neverland?
I'm sorry?
Was it perhaps the first visit that you had taken to Neverland?
What's the question?
The question of when you had the conversation with your husband about your son sleeping with Michael Jackson.
I would say that would have been perhaps during the first visit, yes.
During the first visit?
Aha.
And the only subject of that conversation with your husband was whether or not it inconvenienced Mr. Jackson to have your son in bed with him. Is that true?
I believe so.
Did Mr. Jackson ever tell you that he thought of you as family?
Yes.
Did he do that often?
I believe so, yes.
Did he encourage you to think of him as family?
Yes.
And did he, in fact, suggest that you consider that he be family to you?
I believe so.
Did he tell you that he was going to be in the picture for a long time with you and your family?
I believe so.
That he would be a friend to you and your family and assistants, and that he would have your family as his family?
Well, that we would be his friends for a long time, yes.
Did you ever tell him that you loved him as much as you loved any other member of your family, including your children?
I believe that I would have said that I love him very much.
Did you ever tell him that you loved him as much as any other member of your family, including your children, as much as you love your children?
I don't remember saying that.
Did you ever send Mr. Jackson any letters?
I probably have.
Did Mr. Jackson ever ask you to leave Neverland?
Never.
Did you believe that you had to leave Neverland at some point?
No.
Was Mr. Jackson going to send you to Paris?
No.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Mesereau, here's the original of the letter I gave you. I'm going to show you Exhibit 897, 897, a 2-page letter. Go ahead and take a moment and look at it. You can hold on to it. I may ask you a couple questions about it. Did you read the letter in its entirety?
Aha.
Do you recognize that letter?
I believe so.
Is that a letter that you wrote?
I believe so, yes.
It's in your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
Do you have a recollection of having written it?
Aha.
Is it true that you said in that letter, I love my family deeply, and I love you as much as I love them?
I believe, well, I've read this. Yes, I did say that.
I'm sorry?
I did write that, yes.
And was that a true statement when you wrote it?
Yes. Well, I wanted to let Mr. Jackson know that I loved him very much, and I believe that I had hurt him at some stage because I was behaving inappropriately. And that's why I wanted to apologize profusely, just to let him know that I was regretful of what I had done.
This was written September 9, 1992. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
You wrote in the letter that, Bill told you yesterday we were responsible for your illness. I felt like killing myself.
Aha.
And that is something that you wrote, is that correct?
That's correct.
Alright. Bill is who? Bill Bray?
That's correct.
Who is Bill Bray?
He was Mr. Jackson's head of security.
Okay. And in 1992, your son was how old?
10. Oh, 10 going on 11 at that stage. 10 and a half.
So you had known Mr. Jackson about a year at that point?
That's correct.
What illness was it that you believed that you were responsible for?
Well, from my recollection of this particular incident, we were on tour and, with Mr. Jackson in the European tour of the Dangerous Tour.
Ma'am, what illness was it that you believed?
Objection. He's cutting off the witness.
I'll object as non-responsive. The answer.
Sustained.
Tell us what illness it was that Mr. Jackson had that you believed you were responsible for.
I don't recall what the illness was.
But it was serious enough that you felt like killing yourself?
Well, it was probably a bit overdramatic what I had written there, but it was only because I felt so bad about it.
But now you don't even remember what illness it was.
No, I don't remember what the actual illness was, but I remember that I had caused him some grief.
Did he have an illness that required medical attention?
I'm not sure whether it actually required medical attention, but I know that he felt that he was feeling unwell at the time.
Feeling unwell physically or emotionally?
I guess probably emotionally. I don't know. But all I know, that he was feeling unwell. I don't really know the extent of, I don't remember what actually how he was feeling, what the actual feeling was, whether it was physical or whether it was emotional. I don't have any recollection of that.
And was this because of an outburst of some kind that you staged?
Pretty much. Well, it was a personal matter between Mr. Jackson and myself.
What did you say to him? That caused you to feel like killing yourself?
Well, this is the reason why I felt so bad is because it was, what happened was that during the tour, there was a particular city that we were visiting. There wasn't quite enough VIP passes for everyone, because they had VIP passes for numerous guests.
What city were you in?
I don't actually recall which city.
Objection. The prosecutor interrupted.
Sustained.
May the witness be allowed to complete her answer, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'll object to the narrative form of the answer.
Well, you asked the question.
I'll withdraw my objection, Judge. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Do you want the part that you've already said read back, so you can complete your answer?
That's, please.
All right.
Well, this is, the reason why I felt so bad is because it was, What happened was that during the tour, there was a particular city that we were visiting. There wasn't quite enough VIP passes for everyone, because they had VIP passes for numerous guests.
And I was informed that I wasn't able to go and see the show. And I was upset over that, and I'm ashamed to be telling this to everyone, but that's pretty much what happened. And I didn't realize that particular outburst was going to make him feel bad. And what happened was that he explained to me that he had several things on his mind and that he wanted to make us happy, and because I was unhappy, that was causing him grief. And so I felt pretty much disgusted with myself for having.
What city were you in?
I don't recall which city it was. It was a city possibly before Paris, or, I'm not really sure.
What country were you in?
Again, I don't remember.
You were in Europe?
We were in Europe, yes.
So you've done tours with Michael Jackson in Europe, in South America, and in the United States?
Well, I didn't actually tour with Mr. Jackson in the United States.
All right. On this particular occasion, the occasion of writing this letter, you were someplace in Europe, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And you had some kind of an outburst that upset him deeply?
Aha.
All right.
And it was to do with the fact that.
I'm sorry?
It was to do with the fact that I wasn't able to go to a particular show.
And to whom did you complain about not being able to go to this show?
I believe it was possibly with Mr. Bray and with Mr. Jackson.
So Mr. Jackson was there at the time?
Yes, he was.
And you had an outburst, complaining about not being able to go.
I call it an outburst, but it was the fact that I showed my displeasure, and that, because I was upset, in a way that upset him, because he wanted us to be happy and to enjoy the tour, and it seemed like I wasn't because I wasn't able to go to one of the shows. And it was very petty and, on my behalf.
Actually, you didn't say, outburst, you said, outbursts, plural. You had a few of them, didn't you?
No, I didn't have a few outbursts. But probably, it could have been because I had expressed my displeasure with Mr. Bray and then with Mr. Jackson. that could have been why it's in plural.
Now, because you had an outburst over your displeasure at not going to a concert, you felt like killing yourself, and you wrote that in a letter to Mr. Jackson?
I did, but that, again, like I said, it's probably an overdramatic statement because of the fact that I felt so bad. I wanted to let him know how bad I felt, but I had no intention of killing myself. But that was just an expression to let him know that I was very, very remorseful and how bad I felt about it because of the fact that I had been selfish.
Did your son actually go to that concert?
Yes, he did.
Was.
No, sorry, he didn't go to the concert, but he was on the tour with us, yes.
He did not go to that concert either?
I don't believe so.
Did you tell Mr. Jackson in this letter that you were prepared to leave?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell him, the only thing that we will not do, we will not leave without Brett, and that could be a bit of a problem?
That's correct, yes.
Alright, did you anticipate at that point that Brett would not want to go with you if you left?
Yes, because Brett was having such a great time and he would have been very disgruntled about having to leave and probably would have been throwing tantrums, I guess.
You wrote, if the Paris business bothers you, we would be quite happy to go someplace else to avoid any situation, is that right?
Yes.
What's the Paris business?
Well, that could have been that occasion, the concert, that particular concert I'm talking about.
So you think it might have been in Paris that you had an outburst?
Yes. Whether the concert was in Paris or not, I'm not sure. But it was in Paris that actually.
Was your son sleeping with Michael Jackson during the course of that tour in Europe?
At some time, yes. At some stage.
Well, how often would he spend nights with Mr. Jackson as opposed to his family?
I don't remember.
Did you have a conversation with an investigator for the defense last night?
Not last night, no.
The night before?
Not the night before, no.
From yesterday at 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yes.
Did you discuss your testimony or anybody else's testimony with either Mr. Mesereau or any other member of the defense team, lawyer or investigator?
No.
You had no discussion with anybody from 2:30 on yesterday, no one at all?
No.
Nobody told you what questions you might be asked today based on yesterday's testimony?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
The prosecutor for the government asked you questions about Mr. Jackson, saying that you'd been friends for a long time. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Have you been friends with Mr. Jackson for a long time?
Yes.
For how long?
Since 1987, I would say.
And you're his friend today, correct?
That's correct.
The prosecutor for the government asked you questions about loving Michael Jackson. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you love Michael Jackson?
I do, very much.
Why?
Because he's a caring, a generous, considerate human being. He's just a great person.
Have you ever been embarrassed about loving Michael Jackson?
No. I'm proud of it.
The prosecutor asked you questions about Mr. Jackson referring to you as family, correct?
That's correct.
And has he done that?
Yes, he has.
Have you referred to Mr. Jackson as part of your family?
Yes.
Do you consider Mr. Jackson part of your family?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I guess it's just the closeness that I feel, that it's a little bit more than just friendship, so.
And he asked you questions about having to leave Neverland or something like that. Do you remember that?
Aha.
You're staying there right now, aren't you?
That's correct.
Ever been forced to leave Neverland?
Never.
Never had to escape from Neverland?
Never.
Objection. Exceeding the scope of cross-examination.
Overruled.
Ever gotten in a hot air balloon at Neverland?
Objection. Irrelevant.
Sustained.
No further questions.
With whom did you speak prior to your testimony today, at any time prior to today, about your testimony?
Who do you mean? Anyone.
At the time that you arrived in California, did you talk to anybody about your testimony?
From the time I arrived in California, I had a meeting with Mr. Mesereau for about 5 to 10 minutes. And with Mr. Scott Ross.
For how long?
For about probably.
I'm sorry?
Between 15 to 20 minutes.
You've had 25 minutes of meeting since you've arrived in California for preparation for your testimony today, and that's all?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, when you were still in Australia, did you have conversations with Mr. Ross over the telephone?
No.
Did you have conversations with Mr. Mesereau over the telephone?
No.
Did you have a conversation with anybody in Australia before? Anybody while you were in Australia about your testimony, or about this case?
No. Well, within my family we did talk about it, but with my husband and my children, but that's about it.
Did anybody from the defense team contact you in Australia?
No.
Well, how did you know you were coming to California?
I offered to come and help Mr. Jackson. I offered to come testify.
You offered to whom?
To Mr. Jackson.
You called Mr. Jackson?
I called his office and told them that I was willing to testify.
With whom did you speak?
To Grace.
You had a conversation with Grace?
Well, I rang her and I told her I was willing to do so, and she contacted me. To let me know that, yes, it was okay to do so. And then they made the arrangements.
And nobody talked to you at all about what you would say?
No.
So nobody had any idea what you would say before you arrived here?
No.
And then you had a total of 25 minutes of conversation between two different people?
Yes.
All right. And in Australia, did Mr. Oxman call you, Brian Oxman?
No, he never called me.
Did he call your son?
I believe he called him at some stage, yes.
All right. So Mr. Oxman had a conversation with your son, is that right?
Yes, he did.
And did he ask your son questions about what you would be saying as well?
No, that was prior to me making that decision.
So your son had already made the decision to come to Neverland when you then made a decision?
That's correct.
At a subsequent time?
Aha.
And nobody had spoken with you about your testimony prior to that?
No.
And then after you made the decision, you called Mr. Jackson's who? Nanny? Is that who that was, Grace?
Yes.
And his nanny was the only person you spoke to about any substantive information about your testimony, is that correct?
Well, she was the person I communicated with, and she made the proper arrangements, and all the arrangements was made through her.
And nobody called you back to discuss your testimony?
No.
Were you given an affidavit to sign or a declaration to sign at some time before coming to the United States?
No.
Did you sign a declaration or affidavit after arriving at the United States?
No.
No further questions.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
The defense will call Ms. Karlee Barnes.
Mr. Snedden, do you still want the letter here?
I'll take it. Photographs too?
No.
Please raise your right hand.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your name for the record.
My name is Karlee Barnes. Karlee Barnes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Miss Barnes. Miss Barnes, where is your home?
In Melbourne, Australia.
And do you know the gentleman seated at counsel table to my right?
Yes, I do.
Who is that?
That's Michael Jackson.
And is he a friend of yours?
Yes, very.
How long?
Very good friend.
How long has he been a friend of yours?
Well, about almost 18 years. We first started speaking on the telephone, and I've known him in person for about 13 years.
How did you first get in contact with Mr. Jackson?
Well, it was pure luck really. When I was about 7 years old or so, my brother and I were really great big fans of Michael, and my brother wanted to write a letter to him. So with my assistance, we got a letter out to him, and we badly, really badly wanted to go to his concert. That was his bad tour. But my mum wouldn't let us go, because we were too small. We'd get crushed by the crowd. So as a consolation, she let us go see his arrival at the airport. And at the airport, he had a number of dancers and backup singers and band members there promoting, giving us show bags and things like that. So my mum handed the letter to one of his dancers, who put the letter into a mail bag. And fortunately, one day Michael decided to pull out a letter and read it, and he put his hand into the fan mail bag and he pulled out my brother's letter, read the letter, and he decided to telephone us to say thank you. And from there.
And approximately what year was that?
It would have been about 87. Or 88.
And did you speak with him on the phone that time?
Yes, I answered the telephone.
Okay, and this was at your home?
Yes, it was at home.
Okay, and how long did you speak to Michael Jackson?
Well, when I answered the telephone, I said, hello? And a voice comes back, hi. May I please speak to Brett? And I was like, this isn't somebody I've spoken to before. And I said, Brett Barnes? And he's like, yes, please. And I said, okay. I'll just go get him for you. I put the phone down. And my mum said, who's on the phone? And I said, I don't know, but it sounds like Michael Jackson. And so I ran outside, and I'm like, Brett, Michael Jackson's on the phone, and we've gone running back inside. But after that, I was just too shy to speak to him, so it was really only when I answered the telephone that I spoke to him the first time.
Okay, when did you next have communication with Michael Jackson?
It was such a long time, I really don't remember. But he did call us quite frequently from then on.
And did you used to speak to him from time to time?
Yes. Of course, after I lost, my shyness, I definitely loved getting on the telephone to speak.
Did you talk to him a lot?
Yes.
Did you become his friend?
Yes.
Okay, did your family become friends of Michael Jackson?
Yes.
And you're still his friend, right?
Yes, definitely.
Where are you staying at the moment?
I'm staying at his ranch, Neverland Valley.
And had you stayed there before this trip?
Yes.
How many times do you think you've stayed at Neverland?
Oh, many, many times. I wouldn't know exactly.
Okay, and do you remember the first time you visited Neverland?
Yes, that was just after I finished the 6th grade, so that would have been like the Christmas of 1990, like 1991.
And who did you visit Neverland with, if you remember?
My mum and my dad and my brother Brett.
How long were you there?
Oh, that I really can't remember.
Okay, what's your first memory of Neverland when you first saw it?
Oh, amazement. I was just so excited and so happy and just so thrilled to be there. And it was like going into this, I don't know, like this paradise that I've never seen before. And it was just, wonderful.
You still enjoy going there?
Every time I come back it feels like I'm coming home.
Okay, now, the first time you visited Neverland, do you recall where you stayed?
Yes. The first time my brother and I stayed in Unit 3.
Okay, and have you ever been in Michael Jackson's bedroom at Neverland?
Yep.
Do you recall the first time you ever were in Michael Jackson's bedroom?
Well, the first time we went to his bedroom was when we first met him. He came, like our family was invited to meet him in his bedroom.
Have you been in his bedroom many times?
Yes.
And describe his bedroom, if you would.
Well, it's like a normal bedroom, really. He's got a bed, and he's got some chairs. And he's got a bathroom.
And it's 2 levels, right?
Yes, that's right.
And what else have you seen in his room that you recall?
At one stage he had, like, a throne in there, like a big chair. And he had books, and some things that fans have given to him, like a lot of memorabilia.
And have you ever spent the night in Michael Jackson's room?
Yep.
How many times do you think you've done that?
Well, I don't remember exactly how many times, but I do recall at least twice.
Have you ever spent the night there with your brother?
Yes.
Has Michael Jackson ever made you feel like you weren't welcome into his room?
Never.
Has he ever made you feel that you could go into his room whenever you wanted?
Yeah, basically he's always said to us that his house is our house, we're free to go wherever we like whenever we like. It's out of personal respect that I, wouldn't just walk anywhere, because everybody deserves a little privacy.
Has Mr. Jackson ever made you feel unwelcome in his home at any time?
Never, ever, ever.
Have you ever gone to his room and just knocked on the door?
Yes.
And has he been in the room when you knocked on the door?
Yes.
Did he let you in?
Yes.
Have you ever been in Mr. Jackson's room with your mom?
Yes.
How many times do you think you've been in his room with your mom?
Again, I'm not really sure, but it has been on more than one occasion.
Now, do you recall ever being in Mr. Jackson's room late at night?
Yeah, I've slept in his bedroom.
And what were you doing in his room at the time?
Sleeping.
Well, besides sleeping, what?
Oh, well.
Let me rephrase the question. It's not a good question. Before you fell asleep in his room, what were you doing?
We were all talking.
Okay.
And, just having fun.
Aha, what kind of fun?
I don't know. The fun that kids have. Just making fun of each other and telling jokes. And, doing silly dances, and, just things like that.
And would Mr. Jackson do that with you?
Yeah, he liked skipping and jumping, like all of us.
Have you done silly dances with Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, we always like to, crazy things.
Have you walked around Neverland with Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, many times.
And what have you done when you did that? Excuse me, that's not a good question. When you walked around Neverland, what were you guys doing?
Well, talking, telling jokes. Same sort of thing. Running as fast as we can, challenging each other to races. Stopping to look at the animals. And, things like that.
And Mr. Jackson would do that with you?
Yeah.
Okay, have you been to the theater at Neverland?
Yes.
Been in the theater with Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
What have you done in the theater?
Watched movies.
Okay, alright. Do you recall a jacuzzi at Neverland?
Yes.
Have you been in that jacuzzi?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson in it?
Yes, I have.
How about your mom?
Yes.
How about your brother?
Yes.
Have you ever traveled with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I have.
And how many times have you done that?
Well, I've been to, in 7th grade, I spent half of the year over in Europe with him. And in the 8th grade one spent half of the year over in South America. And I've been to Chicago. And we've been to Las Vegas. So I've been, lucky, very fortunate. When he came to Australia for his history tour, he took us to South Australia and to Western Australia. So I've been on many, many trips with him.
Have you ever been in the swimming pool?
Yes.
At Neverland?
Yes.
And has Mr. Jackson been in there with you?
Yes, he has.
Ever recall Mr. Jackson being pushed into the pool?
Yes.
What happened?
The boys, there was myself and my brother and 2 of Michael's cousins. And we'd been playing. We had an egg hunt, because it was around Easter time. And then the boys decided that they were going to be, a bit more crazy, and they started throwing eggs at Michael and putting them in his hair, and then, they pushed him into the pool just to taunt him even more.
Has Mr. Jackson ever hugged you?
Yes. Many times.
Have you ever been suspicious when he hugged you?
Never, ever.
Has Mr. Jackson ever kissed you?
On the cheek, yes.
Have you ever been suspicious of his behavior when he did that?
No, never.
Have you ever hugged Mr. Jackson?
Plenty of times.
Ever kissed Mr. Jackson?
Of course. On the cheek.
Have you ever been suspicious of anything he did when you hugged or kissed him?
No, never.
Have you seen Mr. Jackson hug your brother?
Yes, I have.
Have you seen him kiss your brother?
Yes. On the cheek, yes.
Were you ever suspicious of the behavior when he did that?
No, never, ever.
When you were in Mr. Jackson's room, did you ever see Mr. Jackson do anything inappropriate to your brother?
No, never, ever.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson touch your brother in a sexual way?
No.
Have you ever seen Mr. Jackson molest your brother?
Never.
When you were traveling, your family, with Mr. Jackson, did you see your brother with Mr. Jackson?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever been suspicious of any of Mr. Jackson's behavior towards your brother?
Never.
I have no further questions.
Good afternoon, Miss Barnes.
Hello.
You are positively thrilled to be a friend of Michael Jackson's, aren't you?
Absolutely.
You seem almost giddy about it.
I love him with all of my heart. I've known him since I was about 7 or 8 years old, so he's one of my closest fields.
Do you feel giddy when you're going to see him a little bit excited?
I feel no more excited than I would if I was seeing one of my other close friends that I haven't seen in a while.
Well, but he's different, isn't he?
No, he's not. He's just a normal human being like anybody else. He's got the same organs, the same blood, the same emotions, the same feelings as anyone else.
Well, but not everybody has Neverland, true?
Well, he's worked hard to get everything that he wants, so everything that he has he's worked really, really hard for.
And he shares it with you?
Yes.
And you love going to Neverland?
Of course I do.
You get thrilled when you get to go there?
Of course.
And when you were a child and you got to go to Neverland, it's kind of like having everything you ever wanted as a kid, isn't it?
It's like going to a theme park and a zoo all at once, yeah.
But it's better than that, isn't it?
Well, I guess so, yeah.
Because it's all yours, it's all private, right? No other kids, no crowds?
There are other kids, though, because, it's even better when there are other people there to, play games with, have fun with and share things with.
Haven't you been there when it was just your family?
Yes, I have.
And you get to stay up late?
Yes.
And you get to have whatever you want to eat whenever you want it, right?
Like when I'm on any other vacation or holiday, yes.
And you can play with Michael Jackson, the superstar, right?
No, Michael Jackson, the human being.
Well, he is a superstar.
Yeah, I recognize that, but he's also a normal human being like anybody else.
But didn't you say that you were a huge fan of Michael Jackson's before you ever met him?
Yes, I was. And I'm still a huge fan of his music today.
Okay, so you greatly admire him for that?
I admire him for many things, yes, including his music.
Okay, now, you testified a little bit about your experiences with Michael Jackson and your brother.
Yes.
And the very first night that you went to Neverland, you spent all night in his bedroom, didn't you?
Well, we didn't spend all night in his bedroom, no. We took a tour of the ranch. We went on the train that goes around the ranch. We saw, as much we could of the theme park, the zoo. Because my brother and I were so excited to see a place we'd never been before, we spent the whole night trying to see everything all at once.
Okay, but eventually you went back to Mr. Jackson's room, correct?
We might have. I don't remember.
Didn't you tell an investigator that you spent the entire first night at Neverland in Mr. Jackson's room?
No, I didn't.
You weren't playing video games in his room?
I didn't say that, no.
Did you go into his room that night?
I did go into his room that night when we first met him, yes.
Did you stay up all night?
Yes, I did stay up all night, as I said before, both of us.
And
I remember this because we slept the whole day the next day.
It's non-responsive. I'll object.
Sustained.
Now, Miss Barnes, how many nights have you spent at Neverland?
I don't remember. It's been that many that I simply can't recall.
Hundreds, maybe?
Well, I wouldn't say hundreds. But definitely more than 10, 20, 30 times, yes.
More than 100?
I don't remember, but maybe.
Okay, and of that 100 or so nights at Neverland, you've spent only 2 nights in Mr. Jackson's room?
That I remember, yes.
Okay, and of those 100 nights that you spent at Neverland, how many nights was Mr. Jackson there?
Probably about 80, 90%.
Okay, and of that 100 nights, how many nights was your brother there?
All the time.
Okay, every time that you were there?
Every time I was there, my brother was there, yes.
And of those 100 or so nights, 80% of the time your brother slept. When Mr. Jackson was there, your brother basically slept in Mr. Jackson's room virtually every one of those nights, didn't he?
Yes, because he wanted to.
That's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Can you tell me why you didn't spend the night in Mr. Jackson's room as much as your brother?
Because I'm a girl, and I prefer to have a little bit of privacy.
Okay, I see. Is it your opinion that, well, let me back up. How old was your brother at that time?
What, when we first started going to his house?
Uh-huh.
He was about, well, I was about 12, so he was about 10.
Okay, so are you saying that it's okay for a 35-year-old man who's unrelated to sleep with a 10-year-old boy, but it's not okay for a 35-year-old man who's unrelated to a girl to sleep with her?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that from my personal point of view, I was developing into an adult, and I was at the stage where I wanted my own privacy.
Uh-huh.
And there were times when I was happy to, hang out with them and sleep in their room, and there were times when I wanted to have my own room.
Only 2 nights that you felt like sleeping with them?
That I remember, yes.
Okay. Did you know that there were other boys that were at Neverland?
Yes.
Did you see other boys when you were at Neverland?
Yes.
Did you see them sleep in Mr. Jackson's room?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson chose your brother to be a very special friend of his, didn't he?
Yes, because the reason why.
That's a yes or no question.
Yes. Well, yes.
Thank you. Now, when you went on tour with Mr. Jackson, you spent how many nights on tour?
Well, as I said, it was about half the year I was in Europe when I was in the 7th grade, and about half of the year I was in South America in the 7th, in the 8th grade.
How old was your brother at that time?
I was 13, 14. So he would have been about 11 or 12.
And virtually every night on that tour, Mr. Jackson slept with your brother Brett?
Yes.
How many nights would that have been, approximately?
Let's see, let's divide 365 days into half.
Okay. Is that about it? About.
Well, if I said I spent half the year overseas with him 1 year and half of the year overseas with him the other year, I think that would total about 365 days altogether.
Okay. So 365 nights he spent the night alone with your brother in his room?
Yes.
Did that ever seem odd to you?
No.
Didn't seem odd to you that a 35-year-old man
Not at all.
is sleeping with a 10-year-old boy?
Not at all.
During this entire period of time that you've known Mr. Jackson, has he given you gifts?
Yes, he has.
Did he fly you over to the United States?
Yes, he has.
Do you fly first class?
I have flown first class, and I've also flown business class.
Did your mother permit this?
Yes. And so did my father.
And do you know if your brother thinks it's a disgrace to be a victim of a child molestation?
Of course he would. I do, too.
So if he had to admit that, it would be disgraceful, wouldn't it?
Well, no, it's a disgrace that it would happen to a child. Not a disgrace to admit that it happened, but a disgrace that it has happened, if it has happened.
Thank you. No further questions.
The prosecutor for the government asked you about your brother being a special friend of Michael Jackson. Are you a special friend of Michael Jackson?
Yes. And my parents are as well.
Why?
Well, because we treat him just as we would treat anybody else, as a normal human being. We don't take advantage of him, we trust him, we love him, and we give him a normal sense of life that so many other people never, ever do.
The prosecutor for the government asked you about your brother sleeping with Michael Jackson, okay?
Yes.
And you were traveling when your brother would be in Mr. Jackson's room, right?
Yes.
Did you ever suspect anything improper was going on?
Never.
The prosecutor for the government asked you if, didn't it seem odd that Michael Jackson was in a room with your brother? Did you think it was odd?
No, I didn't think it was odd.
Why?
Because, well, he's a family friend. He's like a brother to us. He's given us, not just given us gifts and given us things, but he's given us.
Objection. Narrative.
Overruled. You may finish.
He's given us friendship and, experiences that we would never get to see, and my brother really always wanted to be there. He wanted to spend every minute, and he still wants to spend all of his minute, all his time with him.
Objection. Non-responsive.
All right.
And that's why it's not strange, because my brother wanted it.
Objection. It's non-responsive.
Overruled.
The prosecutor for the government asked you about victims of child molestation. Did you ever think your brother was a victim of child molestation?
Never.
Did you ever think you were a victim of child molestation?
Never.
Of Michael Jackson?
Never.
Now, have you learned about allegations in this courtroom that somehow your brother was improperly touched?
I have heard that has been said by other people.
What do you think of that?
I think they're liars.
No further questions.
Miss Barnes, has it ever occurred to you that virtually all families that have victims of child molestation where the molester is a friend and acquaintance, has it ever occurred to you that they are shocked and disbelieving when they learn that fact?
Objection. No foundation. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Goes to credibility.
The objection is sustained. Argumentative.
Nothing further. There's no question.
That's true.
Oh, okay.
But you could say, no questions. You may step down.
Thank you.
To the jury, I think it's time for you folks to go home. We've got a couple of things to do, and I think we'll just recess until Monday morning. Let me tell you another day I've been asked if we could take the 20th of September, which is, or, September. Laughter. I'm going to give you the 20th of September. The 20th of this month, May. One of the attorneys has asked. One of the attorneys has a commitment which I'm going to allow him to keep. And I think it's good, too, that we get a break like that. So next Tuesday afternoon we're off, and the 20th of May. And we think we're on schedule. Just so if you're wondering about that information. Everything looks like we're right on schedule. So see you Monday. Remember the admonitions. Mr. Snedden, you had an issue you wanted to take up.
Yes. Actually, I have two issues, Your Honor.
All right.
The first issue I'd like to address is a discovery issue, which has been an ongoing problem. And I wanted to alert the court to the details and also make a record in that respect. We announced last week that we were going to rest, and then again the beginning of this week announced that we figured we'd be finished by Tuesday. We didn't. We finished on Wednesday. But when we began to ask for defense witnesses, we were given the name of 6 witnesses. 5 of them were not even on the defense witness list, and the discovery was provided about 5 o'clock the day before we were to rest. Then we find out yesterday on the witness stand that one of the witnesses had signed a declaration that we hadn't been provided by the defense. Last Saturday, I faxed a letter to the defense, after having reviewed the defense witness list and compared that to our discovery, and there are at least 75 to 80 people listed on the defense list where we have no documentation or reason or reports or anything to indicate why those people are going to be called in this case. Since that time, I've further expanded my research on that issue. There are at least 4 employees from the ranch for which we have no reports on. Today there were 3 witnesses that they were going to call that we have no reports on, one of whom was not even on their witness list that was read to the jury. There are 21 celebrities that they mentioned in their witness list. Of those, 15 have no reports indicating what they're going to testify to. There are 12 Los Angeles Police Department officers, only 6 of which can we identify anything that shows their names in the reports. We have no idea what the others are going to testify to, and I might add that I don't think they know what they're going to be asked to testify to. In sum and substance, Your Honor, it is not my desire to prolong this case. I have as much interest as this court does in moving it. On the other hand, in being fair to us in the way that the court required us to provide discovery to the defense, I think we've been placed in a very unfair posture at this point in the trial with regard. For instance, just to use an example and then I'll just sit down. For example, 2 of the witnesses that were going to be called today, Detective Burchim and Jerome, James. Jimmy Johnson. It's not Jimmy Johnson. Van Norman. They were witnesses whose depositions were taken in a lawsuit for which we have not been able to gain access because there's court orders sealing those records. And the defense knows that they're going to call these people as witnesses, yet they've never provided the transcripts to us, yet we provided all of the transcripts of everything we had during the 1993 investigation. That's the kind of disadvantage that we're being placed at, and I'm only asking the court to hold the defense to the same standard that we're held to and were being held to during the presentation of our case. Now, I'm not unreasonable. I understand that there are going to be times when there are going to be things that are going to be turned over late. That happened to us. Somebody says something different or adds something to something at the last minute. But to have this kind of problem set forth when we're talking about literally hundreds of witnesses with no documentation, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to be prepared to continue and keep this trial moving on track. And I'm asking for the court to enforce the provisions of the penal code that requires the defense to comply with discovery. Oh, I want to also add, some of the reports that we were provided at 5 o'clock on Tuesday night were reports that were dated in January. In other words, the defense had had them for 4-5 months. Oh, do you want me to tell you the second thing and I'll sit down? Or do you want to do them separately?
Whatever you like.
Let me do it separately, at the same time and get it done.
At the same time, separate?
I indicated to the court that it is our opinion, and we filed a brief on it this morning, that the defense has opened up the area of character evidence by introducing a lot of opinion evidence through all these witnesses, and we're asking the court to hold a hearing as to what we are entitled to ask, in good faith, of have you heard questions and to have some of those people recalled as witness or for future witnesses that may stray into that area. Thank you.
I haven't seen that material yet.
Okay.
Usually it's brought over to me as soon as it's filed, so are you sure you filed it this morning?
It was this morning. I was under the impression it was filed this morning.
Okay, usually I have it by now. As to the discovery issue?
Yes. Before I address that, can I just, on the matter of things getting to the court, we also filed something this morning, and Your Honor, a little while ago, didn't have it.
Which was I don't have that either.
It was the response to.
I know what you're talking, to the last item on.
I remember sequentially what it was, but the substance is escaping me at the moment. Anyway, we did file it. It was on Mr. Viner's testimony.
Viner's testimony. Yes. Okay.
Well, I suppose all I'm saying is, there may be a glitch somewhere in the conveyor belt from where it started and where it's coming.
I'll check.
With regard to discovery, first of all, there's some factual inaccuracies in what Mr. Zonen just said, one of which is he said that names were not on the witness list that we have included on our list of people that we're trying to give both the court and counsel prior to calling them. And that is not correct. They are. The ones that are added are at the end, starting on page 28 on the 6th amended witness list. So they were put on the witness list, but they are not alphabetical.
But you gave that list yesterday.
No, it was. This last one was a couple of days ago.
The day before?
But we have, there's two different lists. Let's just be clear, Your Honor.
I guess the question, though, is, does that really comply if you make a new list and put the name on it the day before you call a witness when you gave the real list several months ago? I mean, I find that to be a little.
Let me address that before the court forms an opinion on this, okay? If I may.
All right.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to misread what the court was saying. What has happened is, we have witnesses on the big list that was provided originally in December. The prosecution filed one in December, and then we all filed amended ones in January, and both sides have tried to keep up, all right. The defense has had to react to certain things that have occurred. For instance, the prosecution has called some people that they indicated at first they weren't going to call, particularly on the 1108. Mr. Abdul was a late addition. He may have been on their master list, but when it came down to figuring who they were really going to call, they called a small percentage of the people they had on their master list.
I hope you do the same.
And we will do the same unless Mr. Zonen forces us to call everyone just to show that we can do it. What we have done, seriously, is taken the master list, which had, let's see, something like, by the time we add all these other people, something like 500 and some people on it. We've taken that master list. Now, the master list, our understanding of providing it was any name or any possible witness who could be called by either side or whose testimony would figure prominently in the case, or their presence, even if they didn't testify. So we were trying to provide the court with something that the court could read and ultimately have counsel read it to the jury so they could see if they knew any of these people. It did not mean that we were going to call everybody. And I think both sides know that's the case. Now we're coming down to the people we're calling. We tried to give a list, not just for today, but we gave a list for a couple of 3 days' worth of witnesses. As I explained to Mr. Snedden personally, and as they did, we have to shift things around as time goes on. We expected that, for instance, we were going to start earlier, and as a result of that, we had other witnesses who were ready to be called, and now we've had to reschedule them because they're from out of town, and that's just the way it goes. So that's that. Now, of the people on our list that we gave to Your Honor and to the district attorney, the short list, the ones we're calling right now, there was one witness for which we had a declaration You have it. Okay. I take it you have Mr. Snedden's as well.
Now I have each of those documents.
Thank you. Of the people that Mr. Snedden just referred to, he said there were 3 people. Of those 3 people, there was one person, Francine Orozco, who we had a declaration from, and we believed that it had been turned over along with a whole series of declarations that had been turned over. They said they didn't get it. We went back. We can't show that we gave it to them. I gave a copy immediately to Mr. Zonen and agreed that we would not call Francine Orozco until they had a chance to review it. He said Monday would be fine, so I think we worked that out. We're trying to be reasonable on that. The other 2, Russ Burchim is a sheriff's. I believe he's a commander now, isn't he?
I think so.
He's a commander, and the only thing we were going to ask him about is contained in his reports on this case, and we have not interviewed him independently. There was one other small issue we were going to ask about. I won't announce what it was. I've explained this to Mr. Zonen. It was an issue that he testified to in the Abdul trial. The Abdul court reporter's notes are, by and large, not available, and what few notes we got were such. They were so garbled, we couldn't read it. In fact, the court reporter hired a computer expert to try to straighten it out and couldn't. We got no notes with regard to this person. So he testified. I told Mr. Zonen what he testified to, which was basically a one-sentence issue, and I said we weren't going to call him for that anyway. So the only issues we're calling him on would be issues for which he wrote a report in this case. The last witness they referred to, James Van Norman, we put on the list not to call him today, but to call him next week. We're just trying to give them a heads up for 3 days, and we have not re-interviewed him. Now, I was just told today, and I wasn't aware of this, that the prosecution did not receive copies of the Abdul case. Because they had Mr. Ring on their witness list, my understanding was they had all the depositions in the files. All the public files have been ordered unsealed, with the exception of just a very few, thanks to Mr. Boutros and his never-ending work over there in Judge Cantor's court. I am now informed, as of today, that they did not have these depositions. I have not reviewed his deposition, and we have no new report. We expect to talk to him before bringing him up here again. I will get his deposition, to the extent we have it, from our old files. If we have it, we will give it to them. So that was really it. Now, as far as the rest of the people are concerned, we are. To the extent we knew we were going to call them and we intended to call them and we interviewed them, we have provided reports. If we have any reports on anybody, in other words, anybody that's on the master list, that we intend to call, if we had a report, we turned it over, to the best of my knowledge. I don't know how Orozco slipped through as a declaration, but other than that, we have turned them over. We understand our obligations. I think we're complying with them. The people, as Mr. Snedden acknowledged, there were. A couple people actually got on the stand, as the court may recall, and we didn't have a report from them at all. So it happens. The court dealt with it and said, call them tomorrow. I voluntarily said to do that with Miss Orozco. I suspect that we will cooperate in that regard. I don't think we're going to have a problem. We will have a further meeting today to make sure that all these Abdul depositions that pertain to witnesses we intend to call get turned over. So I think that really answers the question. We haven't been withholding anything. And I'd suggest, rather than arguing back and forth, unless there's something I said that was factually inaccurate, I'd suggest we try to continue to work this out, because I have talked with Mr. Zonen and I thought we were doing fine.
Is there a way that you could? Here's the problem that I find from both sides, and that is that if there's no report, the party notifying the other side of the witness could make such a notation beside the name, so it's clear on the record to each other. Not for me, but to each other that there is no report, and it gives them a chance. And if you say there is a report and they don't have it, they could get it to you immediately. There's a problem when you don't know if you're just not giving a report, forgot to give a report, or there's no report.
Beyond that, I would go beyond that. There will be a report on everybody. I mean, even if the report is, their statement is their declaration. We actually have one person at this point. The only statement that we could turn over was a statement that a lawyer, paraphrase of what a lawyer told us. In other words, we haven't had a chance to interview that witness yet. We may or may not before the witness is called. If we do, we'll give a formal report. But we have provided that to the DA we'll let them know. There is the concept of rebuttal, and Mr. Mesereau is reminding me to just let the court know. Obviously, a couple of these people, I think I said that at the very beginning.
I understood that.
Orozco and Jimmy Van Norman are really rebuttal to what came up very recently in the case. It's not we're holding back. It's that we're responding the best we can to that. And we're starting with the 93 segment of the case, which I think is appropriate from our standpoint, but it also is the part where we have the real rebuttal burden because we didn't know whether it was coming in and what was coming in until late, so it's compounded that problem. But I think we're getting it done. So if there's any other problem, I would suggest we meet and confer. And, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. Yeah, discussion off the record at counsel table. And I think the court understands. For instance, there are experts like the financial expert who just came forward, and we got his PowerPoint I think the very morning he was put on, if I'm not mistaken. So, we have to respond.
I understand there's always problems on both sides.
We're doing our best is all I can tell you.
I expect you to comply, as I do both sides. Is there anything you want to add that?
Well, I'd like to get out of here early today, Judge, but I just want to say, are we to assume, then, from Mr. Sanger if we don't have a report from anybody, they made the decision not to call them? I mean, there's over 100 people on there, plus, that we.
No.
Well, can we find out?
There's 500 people on that original list.
With no indication why they're coming.
Let's just make that clear. One more time. Just like the prosecution gave us a giant list with a lot of people, we gave them a giant list with a lot of people. We're not going to call everybody on that list. So the prosecution can't assume anything from that. When we give them the list, which we typed out and gave the court a copy and we gave the prosecution the same thing, when we do this, as we do this, we expect that there will be a report that's been disclosed on every single one of the people that we put on the list before we call them. And if we have it, we'll give it to them right now. If we're, for instance, in the case of the one person who's not on the list yet, the one person who we've only talked to his lawyer, we can't give a further report until we get it. So that's the example. But as far as other people that are on the master list, nothing should be assumed. I mean, we're going to provide the discovery as soon as we can. And if we interviewed somebody and we intended at the time to call them, we would turn it over, and that's still our position, and that's what we will do. And I think once we get over the 1108, which is a little bit spontaneous because of the way it came up, it should go a little smoother.
Judge, the difference is very fundamental. We had a list of people and we didn't call them all. But we gave discovery on everybody on that list before this trial started, so that if we did call them they could prepare. There were a couple of people who we added to that list during the course of the trial. And I don't mind a couple of people being added. We're talking about hundreds of people here, without us having an ability to even know why they're going to be called or what they're going to say, and they're going to walk in here, and I guarantee you, they're going to dump it on us 2 or 3 days before they come in here. If we're lucky.
We promise not to dump it on them.
Well, I don't want promises. I want compliance. We had compliance dates that you gave us. Why don't they?
Well, I don't know if this is productive. The fact of the matter is, there were a tremendous number of witnesses for which we had no reports. And we were.
That's not true.
And we filed something in writing demanding the reports and we were told they didn't have them. They had several experts in different categories and they gave us no reports. We couldn't even figure out who they were. Your Honor may recall we filed a motion because they had names down there that weren't even real names of people. I remember one person, they had 2 people's names put together, totally different people put together with a hyphen, and we spent forever trying to figure out who that was. So we're beyond that, and we're going to do our best and
What I want you to do is to give them the reports on the witnesses that you have as soon as you possibly can.
Yes, sir. That's
what's required.
That's what we intend to do. And with the exception of Orozco, for which I apologize, that was an old declaration. I think we've been doing the best we can. So we'll.
And I do remember that I gave you some relief. We continued. You know, we had to put some witnesses off until the next week, or several days, anyway. So if that happens, you're entitled to the same type of relief.
Do you want to address the character issue, or not?
Not right now. Now I have them. I haven't read it, so I want time to study what we're dealing with. Are you going to file a response to that?
That's what I was going to say. If the court would like, or give us permission to do it, we would like to file a response.
I would, if you'll file that Monday.
Yes, sir.
Then I think.
8 o'clock or 8:15 or something.
Yeah, that's fine. Now we have to have an in-camera hearing on the issue that Mr. Mesereau requested. So I'll need an attorney from each side, the court reporter and the clerk.
I'll go in.
And for those present in the courtroom, there won't be any further open court sessions today, so if you want to leave, you may.
Your Honor, can Mr. Jackson leave?
Yes, Mr. Jackson may leave, too.